Saad, it's been a pretty good week, man. Episode 25. I'm sitting on my, I'm sitting here yesterday watching YouTube, my standard protocol, and a video pops up for a place that sounds familiar, Semper Fortis for Jiu-Jitsu, and there's a picture of you sitting there. Right. And I go, whoa, I don't know Saad to make videos on his channel. Right. So I start watching it, and you start telling me this insane story. You really told everybody, right?
Sure.
So if you go to Semper Fortis Jiu-Jitsu, you'll get the long version of this story with pictures and narration and everything. But I want Saad to just kind of tell you a little bit about his grandpa.
Cool. So Monday was December 7th, which is the day, it's Pearl Harbor Memorial Day, or Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. And my grandfather, who raised me, he was at E5 in the Navy, and he was stationed at Pearl Harbor the day of the Japanese attack, that Sunday morning when Japan came in and attacked Pearl Harbor, and so many people lost their lives, and that's what officially entered the United States into World War II.
Sure.
Because up to that point, we were trying to stay neutral, and then
I mean, the Japanese were mad that we didn't sell them any more metal.
Right.
So we were sort of neutral.
Sure. Like
they had their reasons for sure.
There was economic reasons.
Absolutely.
And so they do this surprise attack on a Sunday morning, and my grandfather was there, and there was a stretch of my childhood where I couldn't live with my parents, and so my grandfather took me in, and so I lived with him, and I was just maybe first grade, second grade, third grade, I was a young kid, and I'm living with him and him and my grandmother, and there was so much I learned about him after his death. So he died in 1982. That things that he just didn't talk about. Like there was mention in passing in the house that he was at Pearl Harbor, but
I mean this is a crazy story. You would think that it would. Right. That it would come out somehow, being that everyone's military, right. You're military, sort of. At a certain point, you are.
Well, because I didn't join the Navy until 1986.
So it's after.
So I was 1982. I was when he passed. 15, I was in middle school.
14
maybe I was a freshman in high school. Like I was so young. I didn't know about it. I just knew he was in the Navy. I remember my grandmother mentioning, he was at Pearl Harbor when it was attacked, and he retired from the Navy, and then he retired in Champaign, Illinois, where, it's most famous known for, it's the home of the University of Illinois. And it turns out his last tour of duty he was attached to the NROTC unit, which a friend of mine pointed out on the video as I'm talking about it. I was like, Naval Reserve Officer Training, and then the C, it's like, maybe it stands for Command, but it turns out it stands for Corps. Okay. So it's the Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps. And he was just doing admin work for the Navy, helping those students, and that was his last duty station. But, like so much of his life, one, he didn't talk about it. All I knew is he was in the Navy, he retired from the Navy, and then he became a semi-truck driver. And, so he such a huge influence on my life because one, I got my love of the Navy. I followed in his footsteps, and I stayed in the Navy until I retired 2 years ago for 33 years. And then two, he introduced me to martial arts because he taught me how to box. We'd be in the front yard, we'd have our boxing gloves on, and he's teaching me how to throw jabs.
What age do you remember this being?
I was first, second, third grade. So
you're talking about 8?
Yeah, between 8 and 10,
Yeah, 8's third grade,
sure.
So 5th grade's 10. So you go into middle school about 11. Yeah, that's right. I remember the same lessons at the same time, and it was my Uncle David.
Nice. Yeah.
So it was my mom's brother, who wasn't a boxer necessarily, but he knew way more about fighting than I did, and his son was a few years older, and he got some gloves and taught his son how to do it,
Right.
and then the son would beat me up, and then he'd teach me how to do it.
Right.
So yeah, this was normal back then.
Right. Yeah. He's just teaching me how to fight, and so this is the guy that taught me how to fight. He inspired me to go into the Navy, and then as I mentioned in my video,
Yeah, this is great.
him and my grandmother would rescue dogs. Mainly, my grandmother was behind the rescue of the dogs, and this is like 1,000 square, maybe a 1,200 square foot house, and his rule was like no more than 6 dogs at one time could be in the house.
So you're in a 1,200 square foot house with you. Any
Yes.
other grandkids there?
No, just
you.
my grandfather, my grandmother. So it was a 2-bedroom house. He had 1 bedroom. He had another because they were actually had divorced years ago, and
Your grandmother and grandfather.
yeah,
Okay.
and something happened in her life, and I want to say she married once or twice after her and my grandfather got divorced, and then something happened, and then she moved back in with him, but they were never, they lived in separate beds. Yeah, like
cohabitating.
And when he passed away, he left her the house as if she was his wife, but she wasn't. They were no longer married.
Super interesting, right?
Yeah.
So it's a way they're showing a development of mind, or at least a respect for each other, that you can still live together and have a separate deal. Right. Everyone knew about that, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
so
like
the
whole family
knew
knew they were not married.
And they were kind of raising you together.
Yeah.
But they're separate.
But they're in separate bedrooms.
Separate bedrooms, and you're getting the dog lessons.
Yeah. So it's a 2-bedroom house. He's in 1 bedroom. She's in another. And then every night they would roll out this roll-out bed. It was like a single bed. We would fold it up.
Murphy, I think, right?
And
Or
then,
something like that.
I don't know what it was called. But
Murphy comes out of the
roll
wall.
it out, and then unfold it, and that's what I would sleep on every night in the living room. So I didn't have a bedroom. I just slept on this roll-out bed.
Okay.
In in the living room
with the dogs.
Yeah,
and you were loving it.
Some of the dogs would sleep with him. Some of them would sleep with the grandmother, and some of them would be out in the living room and stay with me. And it was like that was our life, and it was awesome. And so, I learned my love for the dogs. That was an incredible gift because this amazing guy who was one of the kindest, one of the toughest men I ever met, but at the same time one of the most warm-hearted, kindest men I ever met. And I talk about it in my video, but I remember how stunning it was to watch him just cry almost just uncontrollably when his dogs passed.
Yeah.
Like he loved those dogs with his heart and his soul.
So it's like you're telling me grandma's adopted him, but it's really
Right.
Dad who's the softie and let that happen.
Right, yeah, because
and then he
loves
finally
them.
puts the brakes on at 6 because
Right.
we have to be reasonable.
Right.
But he loves these dogs more than anything. And you know what? It's weird because I'll get touchy about a lot of stuff. I'm pretty emotional. But there's not much that'll shut me down than having to put my dog down.
Right,
and especially quickly.
Yeah.
If I can't plan it, if it's an emergency,
right.
Like I've had a few really quick ones, and like I had one seize out of me once, and I'm trying to get him to my vet, and he's seizing so hard the vet sees it and goes, "Listen, you got to go here."
Sure.
And now he's deferring me down the spectrum, and here's like, "Listen, we got to put this dog down now."
Yeah.
But my vet can't tell me because the dog's in the car. All the second vet had to do was see the second seizure and go, "This dog's brain's fried."
Right. Yeah.
We have to get your wife here now to put this dog down. I mean, it's Beth's first dog.
Sure.
It's my dog. It's happening in 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, these are hard things for anybody.
And with my grandfather, I mean, you're talking about a career sailor, and that comes with its own images of toughness. And a semi-truck driver. That's what he went into after he was done being a sailor.
Right.
And there was an image of roughness and toughness about anybody that's in the trucking business.
Still is, yeah.
Long haul trucking, and this guy's teaching me how to box, but at the same time.
And the age factor, Saad, you told me before that you went with your grandparents, but I didn't know it was kindergarten. That's young.
Yeah, right. I was very young.
So that's your formative years.
Yeah.
And for you to go there and to enjoy the time so much is a testament to your character. Right. I mean, this could have been the worst time of your life, and it almost seems like it's the best time of your life in a lot of ways.
Yes, because, man, they loved me. And it was such a joy living with them and living with the dogs, and the life lessons that I learned from these two just wonderful human beings.
And these are the people that taught you how to be so kind.
Right.
Because this is one of the things that you might not understand, but everybody really loves you, not because of BJJ,
thanks, brother.
not because of Navy, not because your wife, but it's because you're really, really attentive and kind and friendly.
Oh, thank you.
And you make that an important aspect of your day, and you make other people feel important with your smile and your gesture. And these are things that some people don't know how to do. And you're good at this, and somebody taught you this. So you're emulating people that are around you at a time when you were picking up lessons that were necessary.
Yeah.
And I had to do the same thing in a weird way because my mom had to make a decision, and I was around my grandpa and uncles all the time as opposed to my father. I would see my father twice a year for a week, maybe each time. And I was raised by my uncles and my grandpa. And my grandpa was the same type of a weird age, a little bit older, I think, or maybe younger. But he was a World War II supply clerk, and he's the first thing I remember about church, about getting older, about how to work, and we're not done yet, and this isn't right, and this isn't right. And you couldn't do a job well for my grandpa. The standard was sort of crazy. So, but he would also give you a hug at the end of it. It wasn't like he was mad at you, but there was never nothing that wasn't being taught in a lesson form. He was constantly preaching quietly, because you would have to go redo something if it wasn't. There was no when you say tough. That's what I imagined. I imagined there was no way to. I remember this. I had a problem buttering bread and putting on my socks and tying shoes. I have a dysgraphia problem. I had this hand issue. And I always have had it, and I still do. And Grandpa would have me go do the yard, and I would have to put the hose up. And he would want you to row it perfect. And not one time could I do it. But not one time did he not go back and show me how to do it. And that's what I do now. I know how to do my hose perfect. There's no other way to do that hose. That's it. If you don't get that hose back right, I'll throw the whole thing out in a reel, walk it across the yard, untwist it, because one person got my kink on that hose. So there's a weird way that I act just like this dude who really did raise me when I was 2, 3, 4. It was my grandpa. And your grandpa too, it sounds like.
Yes. My grandfather raised me.
My uncles had families. My grandpa
was the greatest influence in my life, and for sure. And probably my most prized possession, I didn't talk about it in my video, is my chief ring that I got from him. When he passed away, I ended up getting this ring, and I remember in the Navy, there's a big, it's a big transition to go from being an E6 in the Navy to being E7, which we call a chief petty officer in the Navy. Huge transition, but I'm wearing this chief's ring before, I became a chief, and people are like, "Oh, you think you're gonna be a chief one day?" And it's like, no, I do think I'm going to be a chief one day, but that's not why I'm wearing this ring. And so, I would get ribbed every once in a while. People are like, "Hey, you're not a chief yet. What are you wearing this chief's ring for?" And it's because this is the one thing beside. I received so many life lessons from my grandfather, but the one possession that I have from my grandfather was I have his ring, and it's probably my most prized possession. It's not a expensive ring. It's not gold. It's some kind of silver metal. It has no monetary value, but for me, it's priceless. Like you couldn't offer me enough money for me to give you this ring. Like this is
right.
And so that and
I've never seen one before.
Yeah, it's so I've worn this ring for years. It's just
There you go.
Something I love, and because it reminds me of him, and just the life lessons. Because he was a rugged, strong man, but he had a heart of gold, and the courage of I try to picture the terror that he must have experienced when Pearl Harbor was attacked, because it was a Sunday morning, and you know, I know my grandfather, he loved to drink beer. You know, he loved to have a good time. So he's probably out having celebrating on a Saturday night.
Sure.
You know, sleeping in on a Sunday, and, you know, had no idea this was going to be the most devastating day of his life up to that point, I would imagine. And then the war goes on. The United States gets involved in the war, and he gets assigned to be on this destroyer to chase and hunt submarines in the Atlantic. So he's hunting these Nazi submarines who are trying to torpedo, because you can't see the submarine. You're on the open ocean. You don't know where the sub is. You're hunting it, and, you know, the sub pops up and, you know, torpedoes one of our merchant ships, or, you know, one of our ships that are carrying supplies to resupply the war effort in Europe. And it might be a ship full of troops, a ship full of ammunition, food, you know, what have you. And so it was a huge part of the war effort in the Atlantic to identify and find these submarines before they sunk our supply ships. Because if you can eliminate the resupply and cut off the supply line, you know, that, you know, you leave the troops on an island. You know, that's how the Russians both devastated the French when they invaded Russia. They cut off their supplies. So the troops weren't defeated in battle, in some big battle. It was like the supplies were cut off.
Attrition.
Yeah, the troops just starved and didn't have resupply of ammunition. And then the Nazis, you know, didn't learn the lesson from the French, you know, 100 years before, and did the same thing. Went far into, you know, Russia, didn't have the resupply, and next thing you know,
your dad's on a boat that's going down a channel that's getting hit by U-boats constantly after being in Pearl Harbor, comes home, turns into a semi-truck driver, picks you up as a scruff, starts raising you in the middle of being old, thought he had all this done, thought he got divorced, the wife comes back, seems like a super nice guy.
Heart of gold.
And it seems like Grandma was pretty cool too, because they wanted to hang out with each other in the end.
Sure.
It's a crazy story, Saad. It's so weird how family and people come into your life and how much influence they really are. Because my mom passed 2 years ago, and there was nobody that I was closer to. I mean, I was a mama's boy. She lived with me for, I lived at Beth's house a year before we moved here, so maybe like 4 years I lived with her. Then she lived with a buddy of mine. But the last 5 years, 6 years of her life, she was with me. And I would have always told everyone I was going to, especially when I was a drinker, I expected that to be not the end, but that would be a really hard time for me. And then she passes, and it's weird. It was almost like I had a relief. So it's like you have people in your life that she's working so hard to raise me, sort of solo. I mean, Dad was around in idea, and I knew who he was, but I would only see him twice a year. And at the same time, my uncles are on that front. My dad meets this lady named Susan, and my mom is now gone, who would have handled all my medical stuff. And I'm going into surgery tomorrow, where they're going to go in and take care of 7 ligaments in my right shoulder. And Susan's been a nurse forever. My dad always married up. So his idea was, you know, you marry someone that can take care of you, you make sure they're taken care of, and everyone takes care of everybody. And it's a pretty good notion, except he's usually talking about my mom or somebody else's or something like that. So to me, it's hard to hear, but he's right in the same way, because he's always married smart people, and they were nurses and whatnot. And Susan's coming to take care of me. And there would be no relationship with my father if it wasn't for Susan. Because there was a certain point where I wasn't hanging out with my dad too much at all, because he was like a crazy partier dude. And he wasn't, you know, his idea of discipline is different than what my mom would be. He was raised very, very hard. Like, my dad went into the Navy at 15 with his dead brother's ID because home was so hard. So he, you know, he had his own issues growing up as a child, right? And he had to get out. And then my mom and my stepmom merged together almost like a team early on, super early. As I was a baby, my sister was a little bit more than that. Maybe I was 5. And they turned into a unit together, really, and my dad was there too, and everyone worked really, really well together. So there was no animosity in this divorce. There was nobody that was mad at me. If anybody was mad, it was me. It wasn't my mom. It wasn't my dad. It wasn't Sue. It wasn't. So But my uncle's the dude in the background going, your dad loves you as much as he knows how.
Sure.
Kind of explaining things. My mom's never complaining about him because she doesn't want to be that person who's complaining about your father. Right? And she's working a lot, and that's not her way. She's not complaining about people. My uncle's going, your dad loves you as much as he knows how to. You have to be okay with certain aspects of life that you're not going to be able to control. My uncle's giving me the guru information. He's in the background teaching me how to fight. He's in the background going, listen, you're way bigger than everybody. Get really loud one time if someone's threatening you. Warn them once. After that, let them have it. Don't ever hesitate on somebody if you think you're gonna fight. You never wait. You're never the wait. You're never the one waiting. If you think you're gonna lose, maybe you grab a brick and hit him early. There was no way he wasn't winning the fight. He would tell you that. He goes, if you think there's a chance, there's no winning these things normally. He goes, I'll throw sand in someone's. There was no rules with my uncle, and it really worked out well as a bouncer. Because you had to lose respect for females as a bouncer. You had to lose respect for authority figures as a bouncer. You were the authority figure. The cop who's coming in, who normally gives you the ticket, is the drunk one at night you're bouncing out. So you have to know how to disseminate real quickly between what is right and what's wrong, and you got to be the authority quickly. And my uncle was able to teach me how to think on the spot like that real fast. Things my mom would never know how to teach me. Right? So we got this, like my uncle was the crazy one in the family, my Uncle Dave. When I tell you about my Uncle Dave, I just wish you could have met him once. You would have maybe see where the personality's at. Because I think that's where I may look like my father and talk just like my father and act like my father in a lot of ways. And I do. But I think like my uncle. I think the way I reason and the way I treat people and trying to be kind to a fault, because I know I don't want to be wrong when I come off hard. I try to be really kind because if I got something to say, I'm going to say it. So you need to hear me when I'm talking to you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Like I think we come from a serious time because we were raised by older men in a way.
Yeah. And I think, it's really coincidental that these weren't just older men, but they were World War II vets. And I mean, the courage that those guys had, when you go out on a ship and you're in the middle of the ocean, you don't see land, and this damn German submarine could pop up and sink us.
Yeah.
Holy crap, that took a lot of bravery to go out there.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of U.S. ships were sunk in both the Atlantic and the Pacific. And you figure our grandparents were on those ships. They stepped on board knowing that, hey, maybe you'll come back, or maybe, you're going to be down there with Davy Jones' locker and at the bottom of the sea, never to be heard from again.
Yeah, it's weird. Everyone's taking that trip, and then some dudes, like my grandpa was like 34 when this happened. I mean, he was working at Montgomery Ward's as a manager of a furniture store. He knew supply. He knew supply. He goes in at like 34, and he on his one of his dying days. You know how you have a couple times you think your grandpa's going to die, and he starts telling crazy stories. Well, he was all hyped up on some medicine one day, and he's telling me this story about boot camp and having to run this qualifying thing at the end. But he was 34, and that it was insane. But he sure enough did it, and he did it better than some of the young guys, and he was proud to. But he left my mom, he left my uncle, and my grandma for years to do this thing. From being like full-on employed kids, family, kids are in elementary school to gone. So yeah, the sacrifice was real, even for just a unit clerk. He was he never held a gun. Never said he did. He was a clerk in the army. He was a supply clerk. But that's a cog in the wheel. That cog had to get there.
And with that, we talk about supply being a kingmaker in the military, because without supply, we don't win our battles. Of course, the movies are done on the guys, that are pulling the trigger. They're like, those are the exciting guys, not the guy that's figuring out, how do I get these tanks and all this ammunition from the United States, in these cases, to Germany, to Japan.
Weird.
How do we get these weapons?
Weird story you say it like that, because Beth gets called out. She comes home during the hurricane, that last big hurricane on the East Coast.
Right.
I think you might remember me telling you about this. She comes home, packs a bag. I come home, packs a bag. She goes, I'm going to work. I'm not coming back. We're getting deployed out to the hurricane. I go, okay. She comes home that night like at 1. Goes back to work at like 5. Not going to be home. She does 2 things. She does signal. Her main thing is signal. But she runs supply too through it sometimes.
Right.
So she gets put here and ends up doing both jobs sometimes. Some places she's going signal and supply. And sometimes the signal supply is computers and satellites and stuff that she's pushing around the country and making sure X person has, and the X person training. And so it's a weird thing. It's computers and supply, right? So, long story short, she comes in every night and she says, this person went, this person went, this person went, everyone's going, blah, blah. She thinks she's going. She never left. She was on the computer till 1 a.m. for 3 weeks. Would get back home or sleep at 1, back in the car at 5, back home. 2-3 weeks it was like that. It was like the dogs and me didn't even know who she was. It was like she was gone, but she never left the area. But and that's just one person and one crisis on one cog where you go 3 weeks no sleep. And that's at home. I couldn't imagine being out in the field what they're asking you to do. The ability for her to do that 3 weeks and never bitch and think she was leaving every night and ready to leave every night.
Yeah, it's a crazy thing about the military, because you're always on call, and like, I admire Beth for the sacrifice that she makes just for, like, the time out of her life that she has to go, and whether it's going to these schools or you don't know, like, because that's a stressor, like, I think I might get pulled for this hurricane relief, and like, you think, what's the military going to do on hurricane relief? The military is experts. Not just in pulling triggers, but in making sure that there's food for everybody that needs to eat. Like,
and logistics
there's
for all
medical
the planes
care
in the air
for everybody that needs medical care. That there's, jackets, there's boots, there's all the things that you need to resupply military troops that are moving on an invasion are the same things you need to resupply people that are affected by a hurricane or a natural disaster. And that's why the military is always called when a hurricane
There's a crossover there. I didn't ever realize that.
They are experts. They're simply the military supply people are simply the best in the world. The U.S. military ones. I can't speak for the other militaries. The U.S. military people, absolutely the best in the world at getting supplies on station where they're needed at the right amounts. And that's food, clothing, so much more than what, people think, you just send bullets over. No, trust me, that person that's invading, he wants to eat 3 squares a day.
Sure.
Somebody has to make sure that food gets there.
Sure.
In the right amounts, like, you don't want too much because you got to haul all that. But you can't have too little because now you got people that ain't eating.
And then sometimes you're rebuilding areas. Like what we were talking about with the hurricane, It's not just their people; it's everybody else. Yeah. You got to get population densities and figure out how to come in and maybe bring aid and like all the other stuff coming.
And it was like, like we have the Seabees in the Navy. They will build a big airstrip in the middle of the desert, and we'll land, aircraft on this, not just helicopters, but like C-140s, C-130s, like they're landing. And you're like, how did they just build this airport? How did they just make this happen? And just like that, in the middle of nowhere, they're just making it happen. And then, of course, there's some pilot that's freaking landing on it. And like in the desert, they weren't landing on concrete. They're landing on, sand. Whatever they did to the sand to make it to where those planes could land. It's like, are you kidding me? I'm watching it, and I'm like, this cannot go well. This doesn't make sense.
It's so crazy.
And just amazing people. So when you talk about a war effort, there's so many people doing so many amazing things that make it all come together. Of course, like I said, we think of, the trigger pullers or the special forces guys that are doing like exciting stuff, but there's thousands of people
it's just
behind
the tip
them
of the iceberg, right?
Making
That's
that
just
happen.
Here. That's what you see above the water.
Right.
this much under.
And it's really an amazing thing that the military, the whole system of the U.S. military, how we pull that off. And I keep going back to the bravery of those folks in World War II. Because there was people that would be prisoners of war, and years were going by. Their families had no idea.
Sure.
Is this person alive? Are they dead? Are they coming home ever? Are we ever going to see their bodies again? And in some cases, we're still discovering bodies.
Absolutely.
And man, it's just an amazing thing. The mettle that the World War II generation had.
I think we're lucky to be around these guys.
Sure.
I think it's almost like maybe like my generation, like not your generation or our generation, maybe had it a little bit softer. We're in between the Vietnam War and then you have the Gulf War in '93. Right. So you saw that.
Right.
So so you saw the Gulf War, but in between the Gulf War and Vietnam, there's a big opening, right? You have Panama. You have a few things. You have a few. You have a Black Hawk Down situation.
Right.
There's some crazy things that happen, but we're not in full-out war.
Right.
And now you're going to see people coming back to war, like Dan Crenshaw's and the guys that are missing their eye,
Sure.
and the dudes that are coming out and talking a little more realistically, like the Gabby Tulsards about being in war, and maybe this isn't the best way to do it, and maybe we need to slow this down a little bit, and this is why, because I've seen this, or this is serious, or you're being a little more effective. Like we hung out with Travis Haley for a couple weeks ago, and just me talking to you about how that would bother me being sent to a place to do that, and then you're telling me that no, that essentially is what you would do because your friend's next to you. It's not that difficult, and then I discovered things about you.
Right.
So Saad has two different phases in his career. One's officer and one's 17 years running with Marines.
Right.
So you don't talk about that either.
Right.
So you say 32 years in the Navy, but you're not talking about that. Right. So you bring that up when I'm referring to Haley and how he's always so serious about the intent of this class. Mm-hmm. This class was not about learning an AK-47. This class was learning how to kill people and not be killed with an AK-47. And very purposeful reasons why. Like the whole entire speech about the sling. You can't have that speech unless you've been caught up in a sling too many times.
Right.
Or lost a friend.
Sure.
From it. So the hard lessons. Like maybe why these guys were quieter back in the days because they were told to be quiet and no one shared feelings. And now you got guys like Haley who can kind of put it in words. This is why it was serious. This is why you have to be serious. This is why we're doing this. You know what I mean? It's like we have this influence, but we're not the same people. We're different times. But it's almost maybe why you teach, maybe. Almost maybe why you're instructing people, why we're trying to help people, even though it's not necessarily easy or the easiest thing for us. It's weird. Maybe it's because of the exposure to these guys. It wasn't from exposure to my father.
Right.
That's for sure.
Sure. Yeah.
So in my case, right? So somebody's teaching me the base. My mom is always the same. She's always, did you say nice? Did you say thank you?
Right.
Were you kind?
Yeah.
Were you kind? You know, did real common basic things, you know?
Yeah, I think it's very important for children to have role models. The ideal is, it's your mother and father. But sometimes, for various reasons, the mother and the father aren't going to be the role models, And
I think that's normal too in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and so you need somebody else to step up. In my case, I was incredibly lucky that my grandfather stepped up. My grandparents, for them to take me in, step up, and the lessons that I learned from my grandfather and my grandmother have carried me through life. Like, that shaped me, and even to this day, they say, well, who's your greatest hero? My grandfather is. Like, hands down, there's not anybody else. Or like every once in a while, I see something on Facebook. If you could talk, to anybody, for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, alive or dead, who would it be? And some people are like, I'd like to talk to God. And, yeah, that's great. But, for me, it's like, I'd like to talk to my grandfather.
Sure.
Other people would be like, I'd like to talk to George Washington, or I'd like to talk to Dr. King. And those would be great conversations too. But for me, if I have 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever amount of time, talk to anybody alive or dead right now, I'd want to talk to him. Like, man, I
And
love
the same
one
thing
more
for me would be my mom.
Yeah.
The one I talk to the most.
Yeah. Right.
The person I talk to the most in my life. I would do anything to have that 5 minutes, or maybe just hold her.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or just be near her.
Right.
Yeah, that's enough.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So
I think sometimes we fall in love with the idea of heroes that we don't know, and we'd go an extra mile just to be with them. When your child would like that extra mile. Like your loved ones. They're not going down in the history books as like no monuments being built to them, but spend that time with them when you can, because that's worth it. And it's worth it to you. It's worth it to them.
And you got to be the example, man. Because like for a guy who wasn't around his father too much when he was young, you're all over your son, and he's 25, and it's like, hey, my boy's doing this. We're going shooting. We're doing this. We're training. We're going to dinner. Hey, I'm going to be late on the podcast. It's everything about the kids. It's my daughter's in this school. She's doing this. We're training this. So you're extraordinary in that way. Your son's old enough that most people ain't like that. So what's weird is I do the same thing with my kids at work. I'll have a kid for a year, we'll fight, but then the next year I'm almost like his dad. And then they'll leave and graduate, and I'll give them my Facebook profile, and they're like, what's this for? I'm like, just give me a call if you need anything. And I'm talking to kids that are 27 years old now with kids, and they haven't freaked out or hurt anybody or hurt themselves or done anything wrong in 15 years because they met me. Right. And I was the one that was their father, and I still talk to them, and they still know they can call me, and they're still calling me. Yeah. And I think I want to be there for people and be ultra reliable, because I felt in my own time I didn't have somebody that was reliable that I really wanted to. I really wanted my dad to be reliable. And I'm not trying to say anything bad about him. Right. My stepmom's coming in today. Awesome. The relationship is an interesting one. Me and my dad got much better at our relationship mentally after I was 19. Right. And he stopped trying to scare me. Mm-hmm. I think I was way big enough at that point that he understood it for sure. Right. So it wasn't like I need to bulldog this kid no more because he might snap on me or something. You know what I mean? And everything sort of relaxed at a certain age after my 20s. But before that, it was not easy. Sure. And not simple. We had to be men before we even knew how to have a relationship at all. Mm-hmm. So as a kid, you're always wanting. Right. And I never want people around me wanting to know if I care. Yeah. I don't want anyone questioning, is Stomp a loving guy? Yeah. I don't think there's anyone that would ever question that meeting me. Right. I'll do anything I can until you get to a point where I think I have to protect myself. Right. And I'm real quick at that too, because I have learned some hard lessons over time. And I have learned how to be kinder to me over time. And I have learned how to adjust on people and get away from certain people. But life comes down to those people who influence us. And, my stepmom's coming today. It's so crazy. She's in her late 70s or mid 70s. And my dad's been passed for 15 years. He never saw me be a teacher. He never saw me do anything but be a pizza man. He never saw where this goes to, Yeah. And at the time I was a bouncer and always trying to go to school. And I think my mom's sort of like super smart, right? And so I think I might get my learning problems from my dad. He was real good with math, but he had problems sometimes other ways, and kind of a hard head. Mm-hmm. And the crazy part is for sure my dad. Yeah. The exuberance, the let's go do it, the alcoholism, the fun, the love of women, the crazy zest for doing crazy fun stuff. Mm-hmm. That's my dad. Right. So even now, I got this mix of my mom and my grandpa and my uncle and my stepmom all showing me the soft side. Yeah. And I got my dad giving me the hard side. Mm-hmm. And my uncles and grandpa wasn't showing me all soft by any means. Yeah. But I get all kinds of love here, and I get lessons from my dad too. Right. And it's a whole lesson. Sure. It's not like it's not appreciated as I get older. As a younger person, it sucks. Right. It's hard. Yeah. As an older person, I take it as, man, I was able to figure out some things at a real difficult time. Mm-hmm. Without all the help in the world that I should have had, but I still had all this love back here. Right. So you get all the family love from these people who are. It's almost like you feel extra loved. Right. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah. Like I never had a relationship with my father. The irony is that he was a police officer, and my son is a police officer, but my son's never met my father. My wife's never met my father. You know, my son's 27 now. He's a San Antonio police officer. And, you know, like, he carried a lot of characteristics from my father, clearly, you know, to go into law enforcement also, but he never met my father. And it just, you know, but my grandfather stepped into that role to be my father. And then, as a father, I try to be the kind of father to my children that I wanted my father to be to me, that I could never get. And so I never had that relationship with him. And then the irony, when my father committed suicide 2 years ago in his 70s, I ended up having to be a pallbearer at his wedding. I didn't bring my wife and my kids because they had never met him. It's like, what's the point of them coming? But I felt like as his son, I should go to the funeral.
Right.
And so I went, and then I ended up being a pallbearer, which was quite unexpected. And because originally I wasn't even going to go to the funeral, but my stepmother called me on the phone, and you know, my first thought was like, I'm not going. Like, I hadn't talked to him in like 20 years. Why would I go? Like, there's no point. We didn't have a relationship. But she called me, and she's like, it would mean a lot to me if you would come. And I was like, I couldn't deny the request of the woman that had been married to him for 38 years. She loved him to his last breath. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go. And I told Sway, I'm like, hey, you know, I'm going to buy a plane ticket. I'm flying to Illinois, and I'm going to go to my father's funeral. She's like, yeah, you want me to go with you? I'm like, no, just keep running the school. You know, we'll do our thing, you know, and I'll be back in a couple days. And so, yeah, I go and I come back. But it was a crazy time. But it was good to see my stepmother again. It was good to see my brothers, my 3 younger brothers. I hadn't seen them in years. But, you know, like, that my grandfather, you know, gave me so much love and guidance that it was, you know, my life came out okay that I didn't have my father. You know?
Sure.
So, you know, like, sometimes you don't get the role model that you want. Like, my first choice for role model and love was my father. Like, but, you know, that wasn't meant to be.
Sure.
But my grandfather stepped in, and my grandmother. I don't want to, you know, diminish her role, because the two of them, they just loved me, and I felt so loved, and I learned so much about life and loving others and kindness. You know, like, because I think, like, you know, like, one of the things I admire about you is your love for your dogs. And, like, that's almost like a litmus test for me. It's like, to know if somebody's a good person or not. It's like, if they treat dogs like crap, I'm like, yeah, you're not a good person. You know, like,
Right.
that might not be a perfect test, but, like, it's a general test. Like, oh, if this person loves their dog, then, like, they're capable of love. Anytime I meet somebody that doesn't have a relationship with their children, hates dogs, you know, is abusive towards dogs, I'm like, this isn't a good person. You know?
Well, it's interesting because the dogs end up, you know, like we talked about this, I think, on the trip, and I bought you that book, A Dog's Purpose.
Yeah.
So you saw the movie, so you know the point of the book.
Yeah.
But the book is so weird because it really is about the dog taking care of us.
Yeah.
And how they learn to go through multiple lives and how to be better, like a spiritual book about how to become better through multiple lives, and maybe Moose in his past life learned how to, you know, give great hugs and be super aggressive because, you know, he was a little scared or something. And Lou learned how to be just the kindest dog ever because he knew he had to go deal with kids and be super patient, right? So you got two different opposite spectrums, but they're both here for a reason.
Sure.
But the truth is, we love the dogs because the dogs always love us.
Yeah.
So you pet
Unconditionally.
Yeah, that's the unconditional part.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
So you get slobbered on and it's no big deal, and we got the rags and they're sharing. And some people that's like, get away from me. Yeah. And some people are like, oh, give me a hug.
Sure.
But I think, you know, we learn, like Grandpa learns from them. Yeah. They're 6 for a reason. Because they're innocents and they take care. Like, I would like to know his story. I would like to know where that's okay. Yeah. Where it's okay to bring the wife back in even though she's having a problem. Yeah. Like, I got to take care of her too. And I'm assuming that's how it went. Yeah. I'm assuming that he probably had... It was harder for a woman to get her way on back then, and it was easier for maybe insurance or legal reasons. We've seen this in the past. I've heard of this. Yeah. But the dog correlation, the father correlation, the grandpa raising you correlation. I mean, I remember it being so crazy. Yeah, he's just trying to give you a big hug. I remember being so he'll push you all the way across to you,
I
right out of the chair.
I can't pass
Give me an
up
arm,
on
I'll
that.
pull you in. I remember being so crazy that my grandpa, if I had to write him a note, if I had to call to get out of school and grandpa was picking me up, it wasn't happening.
Sure.
And then so if you did call, you had to go to the house and lay down in the bed and you didn't move until 7 o'clock that night when your mom could come pick you up after work because you were sick.
Sure.
Then it's like, what?
Right.
I'm going to come home at 1 because school sucks.
Yeah.
One time.
Right.
I did it once.
Right.
Because then you stay the whole night in bed because you're sick. You can't move.
Right.
You can't do anything. So these weird lessons, right?
Sure.
Don't know. You're not getting out of bed.
Right.
Do you have to go to the bathroom? That's it.
Right.
That's the only reason. You
Right.
should be napping right now. I remember these things.
Yeah.
There's no excuse for nothing.
Right.
So
Yeah.
this non-bullshit demeanor didn't come from... My mom was working.
Sure.
My mom was like a latchkey mom. She came in at 11 o'clock at night, 5 days a week, from 2 jobs.
Right.
Right? So we were raised in a really kind of a weird manner between my grandpa and grandma, and then we were able to stay with her. I remember being solo at 7. 7. My sister was 9. We were by ourselves.
Yeah.
From then on, my grandpa and grandpa didn't have to. They would come by and during the summer and make sure. Here's what they would do. My mom would never let them know. Let us know when they were coming, and we would have pool parties. And I remember one time my grandma pulling up, and we got 17 people in the pool.
Wow.
And I run to the backyard and go, hide! And everybody's hiding behind the pool and up in the rafters, and my grandma comes in, and how you all doing? There's a lot of water.
Right.
Pretty sure they knew what was up. I mean, people were all over the house. Right. But they would come by and check on you like that. Right. Like, because they knew we were crazy. This is when I was like 12. Right. They have like 30 people at the house. My mom's gone. Summertime, I got a pool. There's nobody keeping you out of the pool at that age, you know? So the grandparents were always the ones like putting the brakes on me. Right. Like I remember I got caught driving real fast once, and my mom said it was somebody found me. Positive it was my grandpa. Sure. Or somebody that knew me well enough in the car well enough to tell my mom. So there's a whole little village ratting me out and getting me in trouble and making sure, and I'm not really getting away with everything I'm thinking I'm getting away with. And you know, those are the good people, right? Like when I think of the people that raised me, I think of my grandpa, my mom, my stepmom, my dad, my uncle. It's not 2 people. It's like 7 people. It's like 7 people.
Right. That's awesome.
It's kind of weird, right? So it's to me, I think the whole story fascinated me because of the history and the reverence. And I didn't realize until we're talking right now how early you were over there. Yeah. Like I didn't realize that. That's so. I believe you told me once when he passed, you had to make a decision on what to do, and you were super young, and the Navy was your choice, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went to the Navy
because there was nowhere to go, right? At 17 or whatever, you had to figure it out.
Yeah, I tried living with my parents, because my parents were divorced, but it just didn't work out at either one of their houses. And you know, one of the cool things, probably one of the reasons I've always loved dogs, and they've always been such a an incredible thing for me, is I'm talking about a sad thing for me, which is my father, and his suicide, and the fact that I didn't have a relationship with him, and what does Moose do? He comes over and gives me some love, and it's like throughout my life, that's been my life. Like when I was sad with my grandparent, if someone was sad, I had 6 dogs that come give me love.
That's what I mean.
They come lick on you. They'd be like, hey, I think he needs some attention. And dogs are in tune to the way humans feel, and they're such wonderful friends, which was so cool that I learned that from my grandparents. That these are the friends you want to have, because the dog is maybe the only creature on earth that wishes better for you than they wish for themselves.
Sure.
Your dog loves you, and not to say this Christmas that you should go out and get a dog, because a lot of people get dogs for Christmas presents and then they abandon them because there's work involved in dogs. But man, if you get a dog, man, dogs will love you. I know, when me and Sway got, married, she's like, you really let the dog sleep in the bed with you? And I'm like, yeah, I like this. So every night, because I have 2 dogs right now. I have Bela the pit bull, and I have Panda the English bull terrier. And Panda sleeps upstairs with Samara, my 13-year-old daughter. And Bela sleeps downstairs with me and my wife. And, that's just how we roll. And
Yeah.
I love it because, man, they're, you know, they love on you, and they're so loyal. And plus, you know, like, because, you know, with Panda upstairs with Samara, you know, if anybody came in, you know, anything was going on, like, she would be the first one, you know, like, because she's going to protect my daughter, you know. And it's like,
It's like an insurance plan.
yeah.
Same way I feel about the store.
So, you know, like, I don't buy some fancy security system from, you know, some company that electronically monitors stuff. It's like, no, my security system is my 2 dogs. Like, they will let me know if something's going wrong in the house, and they will defend you, you know, to the death. Like, they're there for you. Dogs are so wonderful. And, you know, anytime you're sad, you know, they're going to come love on you, and, you know.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with them.
Yeah.
You can't go wrong with them. I don't know about 6 because I would get my wife to leave, right?
Right.
But Beth had never had a dog.
Right.
And it's the same thing. She's like, "What do you mean you do this in the dog park?" And then she gets into it, and she starts like taking it to both of them to like day sitting, and where they go play with other dogs, and then I'm like, well, why are we doing that? And then I go watch them on video, and then I find myself looking at like my dog on an app, playing with other dogs.
Nice.
And it's like $20 for the day.
Sure.
And the dog gets to go play for 8-9 hours with a bunch of dogs.
Right.
And it's like, okay. And then like we have like a little food problem, like a hair problem. And then we're upgrading because I'm like dog chow my whole life.
Yeah.
And then we go to like whatever, but it's like 3 times that.
Right.
And then the dog clears up. And then you're like, okay, well that worked.
Yeah.
And then you start doing little things, and 20 years later, you really know how to own a dog.
Right.
Like you get good at it.
Sure.
Like you figure out the vet sucks, or we got to go this, or this food, and now it's like I'm giving out 2 meds. My wife is like gone. I'm feeding the dogs different things. I got this whole routine set up, and it's like my whole day is almost planned, like almost like you. Like what do I got to get to make these dogs happy? Did I get them to a park?
Yeah.
What's happening? And when I do that, when the dogs are happy, I tend to be happier. So when I walk the dogs, I'm happier.
Right.
When I take care of them, I do better. So I think I'm taking care of them, but at the same time, Moose is the one that walked with me every day at the park for a year. Right? Moose is the one that never said no to any training ever.
Right.
Have you ever had a dog say no to a training session?
No.
That's what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah.
They're like the consummate companion.
Right.
It's like they're almost better at being people than people are.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So if you can look at the dog as its purpose is training you, instead of you training the dog, you might pick way more up on life.
Because, you know, we talked about that a few episodes ago when we were talking about just health. And, you know, like my 2 dogs, I walk them every day between 5 and 10 miles a day. And, you know, like when I started the walking, you know, I used to think of the walking as, well, you know, I'm doing it for them. But, you know, what I realized was that walking is so good for your health. Yeah, and, like, I'm not doing this once a week. We're talking about 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I'm walking these dogs. And, you know, 5-10 miles a day, because my smartphone, you know, my wife had to point out that, you know, the smartphone will tell you how many steps you're taking. Because somebody had asked me one time, how many steps do I take a day? I'm like, I have no idea. I don't have one of those Fitbit trackers or anything like that. I'm like, I ain't getting no crap like that. I've got a watch. I'm good. I'm not wearing another watch. And my wife, Sway, was like, no, Saad, your smartphone has an app on it. It'll tell you exactly how many steps.
Sure.
So, you know, I look up my phone and I'm like, holy crap. Like, you know, like on an easy day, I'm going 5 miles. In the winter, and sometimes I get up to 16, 20 miles in a day because, you know, like I walk them morning, noon, at night, where in the summer it's so hot here in Texas that the pavement gets hot, so I can only walk them at night.
Sure.
You know, so they're getting more like 5 miles on those trips. But like right now, you know, the pavement's cool, so I can walk them at lunch and at night and
one of my worst days with Moose is discovering that the hard way. Texas is hot on the pavement.
Sure. Yeah.
It burned his hand, his little feet. He jumped up in the air like 7 feet in the air. And I had to take the car to him.
Sure.
It was a harsh day. Well, man, we are. I think we're pretty close to done, and I think your explanation of Grandpa and my grandpa and the war and dogs and the whole thing is just a fascinating subject.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to like support.
Right.
Like who is supporting you? Who's loyal to you?
Right.
It's weird how the grandparents end up being loyal no matter what.
And you know what's cool is how we evolved in life. You know, like you as a school teacher, now you're mentoring a lot of people, a lot of kids, and especially the kids that you teach are kids that not a whole lot of people want.
Sure.
You know, because you're teaching the troubled kids. And then me as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school teacher, I'm teaching the kids that are being bullied. You know, kids that, you know, for whatever reason are having, you know, in a lot of cases, not all the kids that I get, but in a lot of cases they're having a tough time. They might even be autistic. And, you know, I'm teaching them, you know, how to defend themselves. And it's funny how we evolved later in life as role models. And, you know, like, fortunately, we had a role model, you know, earlier in life. And it sort of carried it on. Because just a historical thing, mentor, the whole word mentor actually came from a guy named Mentor. And if you ever watch Odysseus in his journey, when the father goes on this long journey in the invasion of, it's now called Istanbul, but back Troy. Well, he goes on this long journey to fight this war in Troy, and a man named Mentor is teaching his son all the things a man needs to know. Mm. And it's just an older guy whose role was with the family was like, you teach the kid how to shoot a bow. You teach him how to fight. You teach him how to do these things. And from that original guy, Mentor, it became a term for anybody that sort of grooms you and guides you in life. And so if, you know, you have an opportunity, try to mentor somebody. You know, you see somebody struggling, and it doesn't have to be just a child. It can be an adult that just needs a little extra guidance. You know, try to be a mentor to them, you know, because, you know, we're all in this struggle together, and life can be damn hard sometimes. And, you know, like, sometimes people don't realize that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And that, you know, like, just like right now, you know, there's a lot of people suffering, but sometimes you feel alone in your suffering, when really everybody's enduring. You know, we're all experiencing some discomfort, and we can reach out and help each other, be kind. You know, just like Moose decided to be kind to me and come up and be like, hey, looks like you're not feeling too happy right now. Here, let me give you a little love. So, you know, you see somebody struggling, try to give them a little love. You know, like help them out, give them a little guidance. You know,
give them a little hug.
Let them know that you care. Yeah,
sure.
And so I think that if we want to make the world a better place, you know, like I can't make the whole world better, but I can change the things that I have contact with and try to influence others. And that's how we make the world a better place.
And obviously, just act more like awesome grandparents and dogs.
Yeah.
If anything you can tell from this, just be awesome like a dog.
Yeah. Everything you need to know about how to be a good person, you can learn from a dog.
Yeah, we'll call it at that. Have a great week, man.
Go on.